Greetings, City Schools of Decatur, and welcome to Words with Dr. Whitaker. I'm so excited today that we have guests with us who serve as our newest lobbyists. So I'm excited to introduce you. So first, we welcome Rob Fortson. Hi, Rob. How are you?
I'm great, Dr. Whitaker. How are you?
I am awesome. So Rob is partner at Gilbert Herald. So, and also we have Danica. Hi, Danica.
Hello.
Danica Thompson serves as Vice President of State Relations at McGuire Woods Consulting. So, welcome to the Words with Dr. Whitaker podcast.
Delighted to be here.
I'm just so excited to have you. So, you are our new lobbyist. So, I'm not sure if everyone knows, but the City Schools of Decatur Board of Education employs a lobbyist, and that lobbyist works on our behalf. And so, first question to you all, tell us a little bit about what you do and how you're here.
Sure, I'll go first and then turn it over to Danica. So, lobbyists, so we're state level lobbyists. So we're working at the Georgia General Assembly, which is in session. Usually it started the second week of January and usually ends at the end of March or early April. So they have 40 legislative days. Those are not consecutive. They're not calendar days. So that's why it usually runs us through about the end of March. And so that's when all the business of the state is done. House, Senate, governor. The one thing they have to do every year is pass a budget, but obviously, as we all know, they do a lot of other things along the way as well. And so we represent clients, and we're really excited to get to work with Decatur to make sure that your interests are protected as it relates to anything from an appropriation standpoint in terms of education funding, but also any of those other bills that either directly impact or even touch education and the work that the City Schools of Decatur does on a daily basis.
So, to both of you, tell me about some of the experience you've had working in the sphere of education, and what does that mean under the Gold Dome?
You go for it. I guess you go first there.
Oh, there's so many different experiences. I will say that as far as education, just, working on hopefully increasing the QBE funding and working with legislators on that and having meetings with legislators early and often to advance our efforts have been really, really instrumental and helpful in passing good education policy down the Capitol.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to that is, we've worked on a variety of types of issues around education. Like Danica said, funding's the big one because that's the foundation, as you know, for making the trains go. But also, issues around testing, and then just other stuff that affects the classroom and the work that the teachers do. One of the big initiatives from this administration has been to increase the teacher pay scale, and so we've advocated for that and just tried to make sure that the state really understands the good work that school districts are doing and how they can come alongside them.
Awesome. Well, I thank you so much for joining us today on our podcast. And I will say that every time we're together, we ground our work in our strategic plan. So in the City Schools of Decatur, our strategic plan is called All in Decatur. And our strategic plan has 4 accelerators. These 4 strategic accelerators really root what will happen also from a legislative priority position as well. So first, we have student success in all areas. We'll talk a little bit about ways in which reading has come up, and I've participated as well in the past and under the Gold Dome in that regard. Also, how in the City Schools of Decatur, we will build and sustain an engaging and inclusive culture, and how that too comes up often. You've already talked about past advocacy efforts and lobbying efforts around what would be creating a compensation structure for our teachers. So when we want to cultivate and retain high quality professionals, which is that third strategic accelerator, we must look at that compensation scale. And then finally, thinking about organizational effectiveness and excellence. And a lot of times that is what we would call the brass tacks of our budget. That's that QBE funding, that's that appropriation. It's the understanding of capital outlay. All of those sorts of things have come up very recently here in Georgia, here at the Gold Dome. And so we're going to take a look at all of those. And inside of all of those different areas, we do have a school system that has a mission and has a vision that we must equitably and effectively have outcomes for all students. That is so important for Decatur. It's so important for our Board of Education. And so we create legislative priorities to help inform you of what the board is passionate about so that you can ultimately inform our legislators with that as well. So today we will discuss our proposed 2026 legislative priorities. And these priorities are one that our board does adopt, and they will adopt those priorities in November. But we've already had a precursor read to them in October, so they are very familiar with them. So the 4 proposed legislative priorities are categorized under 4 areas. Number 1, which has been hot topic in Georgia for numerous sessions, but definitely in this past session, which is safety and security. That second piece, another one, has really been something very important for Decatur, which is mental health. And so we will talk about that. And both of those, our legislative delegation in Decatur have been very active as well. Next, number 3, you already talked about it, Rob, and that's funding. Funding is something that school systems rely upon to provide that high quality education. And then finally, number 4, local authority. The City Schools of Decatur desires local authority. And so under those 4 legislative priorities, we really ground our discussion today. So when I think about our legislative priorities for 2026, the board does look to approve those in November. But let's take a little deeper dive into each one of them. So let's start with safety and security. So Rob and Danica, please provide highlights of what to expect in this upcoming legislative session around CSD's safety priority.
Right. Well, as you alluded to, the 2025 session that wrapped earlier in the year put a heavy focus on that, with a particular interest in ensuring that districts are communicating both between each other and also with the state to ensure that the tragedy in Appalachia, perhaps could have been prevented if there'd been a better way to trace students that are transferring in and out of school districts and making sure that those student records are received by the enrolling school as quickly as possible. So the legislature took steps in 2025 to address that. They also added additional funds, and they've done that for a couple of years to provide school safety grants for every single school in the district to upgrade, to provide first alert monitoring. And I know a lot of the things that Decatur already has in place. I think we both anticipate in this session, which is an election year, which is an important part of this, is the 2026 cycle is a statewide election year for Georgia. And so you've got, probably a dozen different members that are of either the House or Senate that are running for governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, attorney general. And so what that means is they're going to be desiring to put priorities out there through legislation that signal, where they believe is the best course of action for our state going forward. And so I think when it comes to school safety, there'll continue to be a focus on making sure that the resources are there to ensure the buildings are safe, that the screening is there for students coming in and out, and that teachers and administrators and counselors all know the students in their building and understand if there there are red flags in the student's record around issues related to school safety, that they can identify it and address it more quickly.
In addition with the school safety, I want to talk about a little bit about how kids arrive to school and from school.
Oh,
And I know the city of Decatur was very instrumental and had a loud voice down at the Capitol when it came to school bus safety and, preventing the prohibition of school bus cameras and radars. So I think that's something that we're going to look at again, looking at this school zone camera situation and putting up safeguards around that, and as opposed to outright prohibition of school zone cameras, because kids need to be able to arrive to school and to leave school safely. So I think that's going to be something that we're going to definitely address for the upcoming session.
yes. House Bill, I believe it was 225, I believe. We did have the sponsor of the bill actually came to the city of Decatur in the middle of dismissal, right on the corner of College Avenue and McDonough. So that means the high school students are releasing and they are walking, as well as the middle school students are releasing from Beacon Hill Middle and they're walking. And you have the majority of our students actually walk to school. They do not ride the school bus. So having speed zone cameras are vital to safety. And so we did partner with the city of Decatur and their delegation as well, and to say this is something that is near and dear to the families and to safety. Another critical piece is around safe storage for firearms. Our chair, Dr. Carmen Sultan, it serves as a pediatric emergency medicine doctor. And the things that she sees at CHOA on the weekend really touches her heart and the hearts of many that sit on our board. So we have signed a resolution towards smart safety for firearm storage, as that is another piece around safety that's important to our Board of Education. And then we talked about threats and that physical threat, but cybersecurity threat is another threat that is one that is impacting school systems all across not only the metro area or Georgia, but I would say the nation. And so safety comes in multiple forms, both physical as well as cyber. And those are some of the things that we need to mitigate as much as possible. And so I'm excited that you will help to advocate for those pieces for us this upcoming year. So we're going to move on to mental health. And it ties a little bit to what you said earlier, Rob, when you were talking about our students and their needs along the lines of safety. You can couple that nicely with mental health. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Right. Yeah. So you took the words out of my mouth. I mean, it's really hard in this day and age to not talk about mental health right alongside of school safety. The two are, because the reality is that, the kids are coming into our school buildings with a host of issues that teachers just aren't prepared to address. Right. But there's got to be more wraparound services. I know school counselors are important. That's something Decatur's prioritized. The legislature in the last session did put some funding through the general appropriations budget for school social workers.
Yes.
And it was not a large amount of money, but it was a good signal, for if you want to be optimistic about it, that the legislature has identified that as a priority, is going to move in that direction. I think ultimately we probably are long past time to really overhaul the QB formula and really think about how we do those weights across the board. And so I would expect that, there are folks under the Gold Dome that are running for higher office that are thinking about that. And we will certainly be advocating for that, to say that, look, part of the mental health equation is making sure that the school, it's not just the teacher in the classroom to help identify it. It's got to be somebody whose sole job is to understand what's going on with these kids, because a teacher's got a lot of other stuff to worry about. So.
I know one of our pieces that we have as far as the ratio. So according to ASCA, the recommendation is 250 to 1 for counselors. Now, in Decatur, we do have 250 to 1, but that's not what we're allocated
It's not
or
your
what.
funding, yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not my funding. The funding is for 50 to 1. But we prioritize that locally to ensure that ratio. What were you going to say, Danica?
No, I mean, we need to definitely do something about that. That's something that we need to have more conversations with those committee chairs early and now,
Mhm.
to improve those numbers and get more funding for more school counselors. I think one of our priorities that we focus on for the upcoming session.
Definitely, definitely. And then when we think about training for all of those, whether they are counselors, whether they are social workers, whether it is our student center, mental health provider, all the people that we know have access to our children, we need to make sure they have the training.
Yep.
So
I agree, especially with now that there's a artificial intelligence committee that's going on and talking about mental health and kids and social media and these different generative chat boxes and everything that's, impacting our children and their mental health. These are the things you don't, necessarily recognize that are, that kids are being affected with, but they come back to school with what they've, been experiencing with at home with these chat boxes, and they affect kids and, and other students. So I think that addressing this issue, sooner than later would be beneficial to the students that we serve every day.
I agree. I know there was an article in the paper, and it talked about a child who wrote a suicide note in a chat box.
They helped
Because-
them write it.
Hmm?
The chat box helped them to write it.
The chat box helped them to write it. And when you think about that, is what the child thought was their friend. We have to have a trusted adult in every school. And no matter how much generative AI is present or how many bots are present, you need a person. And so there was a lot in that safety bill. We are bringing online our anonymous tip line through Sandy Hook Promise, which is who will be our facilitator of that for our students. But that last safety bill that was just passed this past session really has implications for both physical safety as well as mental health. And a lot of school systems were doing a lot of good work now to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our students.
Mhm.
Definitely. But now we can have all of the different ideas around safety. We can have all the different must-haves around. Yes, you did it, Rob, around what is necessary for mental health. But we have to have the funding.
We do indeed. Well, I mean, let's start with the positive. So,
Mhm.
we're knock on wood out of austerity times. So the
Yes.
QB formula has been fully funded now for, the good news is it's enough years that I can't tell you exactly how many. So
Yes.
that is encouraging, because we had a season there of about 4 or 5 years where even the money that was allocated through the formula was not being fully provided to the school district. So that's one positive. Second, as I mentioned, they've continued to increase teacher salaries. So that's also strong. Again, though, back to this question around the QB formula, because it was created in the 1980s, where the things that Danica is talking about, there were no, computers weren't in classrooms. None of the stuff that modern administrators and teachers are dealing with were on the grid even. It's past time to really look at a more holistic QB reform. So the challenge there is obviously that's steering an ocean liner, right? That's a really fundamental shift in how the government does business when it comes to K-12 public education. So we continue to talk to legislators about that, to gauge their interest. We're hopeful that some of these statewide candidates might consider that as part of their platform. But beyond that, the sort of, that's the home run. The singles are, I think, looking at, like you said, reducing the ratios for things like school counselors, and little tweaks inside that formula that could really essentially drive the policy in a direction that would be a better resource for for schools like the ones in Decatur.
I know for us, there were the one little piece to say, okay, for capital outlay,
Yep.
now we will say that you can include your pre-K count. So in a school system where you have buildings that on average are 71 years old, and that average is skewed because we did have one that just went up a couple of years ago. Capital outlay is important for renovation. But to say you can include your pre-K in your count is great. But that was just very recent in the past couple of years. But I would love to push our legislators a little further to including early learning, because what we have learned around the science of reading and the way the brain develops from birth to the age of 5 or even 8, that development really happens in the space that we don't fund. So talk to me about early learning and how you think we could leverage that as something for us to advocate for when it comes to funding for this upcoming legislative session.
So yeah, it's another big one. And part of the challenge there is that the way that our government is divided in Georgia is there's a specific pot of money that's just for K-12. And there's another one for higher ed, and there's another one for pre-K and early learning. In other states, that's not the case. It's all streamlined in various ways that make it more seamless. So we're really, when you talk about those early years, capital outlay is a great example of where the legislature is trying through the K-12 system to make it a little more accessible. But ultimately, when you talk about those funds, you're moving into that budget for right from the start. And one thing I know we're really excited about as it relates to our work with Decatur is highlighting your early learning center, because it shows a system that has identified the problem and not waited for somebody else to figure out a way to address it. That you've said we're going to put our ESPOS funds and our other resources towards this because we know that we cannot wait until a kid shows up at 5 years old in kindergarten and then expect to just turn on the K-12 switch. And so that's where I think Decatur's kind of a city on a hill and something we ought to really be putting a spotlight on. So.
Awesome.
In that facility of yours, I heard you talk about it at your state of the accounting, the education address. It opens up soon, correct?
Yes, in 2027. So we are looking to break ground here at the end of 2025, start turning dirt in January of 26, and with doors opening in 27. So yes, Decatur, the Board of Education, is prioritizing early learning because we can't wait.
No.
The gap is already present. There are millions of words that students do not know, and the social development, the mental health development, all of those things that happen in those early years, when you don't have access, or it's not affordable, or it's not convenient, or it's just not the priority. And for some of our families, keeping the lights on, keeping food on the table, that's the priority. And so how can a community address that? And then how could ultimately those that sit in the room and advocate for us and as our legislators, that would be awesome.
Yep.
That would be awesome. Okay, and another piece around, I would say, early learning in literacy is dyslexia. So let's talk about that journey a little bit over the past couple of years, and how does that also help with funding and access?
So, yeah, the good thing about that issue is that it has received a lot of focus now for 3 or 4 years, dyslexia really probably longer in some ways, where there was funding allocated, I think probably as long ago as 5 years. But now with the work of the Literacy Council and the continued efforts to ensure that the science of reading is happening in every classroom around the state, the synergy of that with the dyslexia conversation has been really encouraging. So you just have legislators. I mean, I heard one speak at a committee meeting recently. He's like, I didn't show up to the Capitol as an elected official believing that literacy was going to be my primary issue, but it now is, because I've seen the challenges, I've seen the data and the scores. It tells me that our students aren't where they need to be. So I would anticipate that issue, I don't know if we're going to see more funding, but that Literacy Council continues to do its work. It continues to come out with proposals, and it's got a whole subcommittee for early learning as well as one for the kind of technical college higher ed space. So it's really trying to holistically look at how do we, ensure that this culture of reading, the science of reading, is implemented, and that every teacher understands how to do it. My first job was as a teacher, and I was a ninth grade teacher, and I had kids that couldn't read, and I had no idea how to teach them how to read. I mean, it's a heavy lift, but it is really it's an important part of the equation.
And the Literacy Council has they'll be in operational to at least to 2030 doing their
Right.
mandate, and they will put forth, what their goals and different initiatives that we can to address a statewide policy around literacy.
I started as a fourth grade teacher. And so understanding the importance of early learning, early literacy, so that hopefully when they did get to you in ninth grade,
If you've been around, I'm sure I wouldn't have had some of the challenges I had.
understood. And then finally around that funding, obviously, is the support that we do receive for salaries for teachers. It always comes up as far as funding and the need around the training and experience and the other continued modernization of the QBE formula. So thank you so much for addressing that in your advocacy for CSD. So we're just about done, but there is still one more piece that is so important and near and dear to Decatur, and that is local authority. What I love about the city of Decatur and the city schools of Decatur is the diversity and the diversity of thought. So the ability for a school system to be able to control locally that thought is what the Board of Education desires. So talk to me about, what does local control over school governance look like? Authority for educational decisions, for resources, for revenue. There are lots of different things that local authority really gives us and brings to us. So please talk to me about that.
Sure. So yeah, it's an interesting issue. And again, just to talk first about the positive side of this is local control. If you got a nickel under the Capitol every time somebody said that, you'd be rich, because everybody from the governor to the superintendent of schools, state superintendent, everyone just firmly believes that local communities should be able to self-determine, unless there's massive red flags like, we've seen recently with districts that have run out of money. I'm not going to go there. It's not y'all. But the point is, so you will rarely ever hear a politician say, oh yeah, I want to steamroll what that local community wants. Conversely, when it comes to statewide politics, and again, we keep coming back to this because it's an election year, that's when that commitment to local control can sometimes be undercut by a countervailing desire to sort of set up a campaign platform that says this is what we should believe in as Georgians, and I don't care anymore if a local community disagrees with me. So, and I don't want to mislead anyone. We will see that this year. We will absolutely see that. There are two bills that were proposed last year that I think, didn't progress through the process, but because we're in a 2-year cycle, those bills are still active and could be, you could see resumed interest in them, or other types of legislation. But at the end of the day, that's where we, as your advocates down at the Capitol are on solid ground. The cities and the counties, everyone's singing from the same sheet of music when it comes to local control is the right thing. These people live in these communities for a reason. They should be able to decide what the priorities are, as long as in the sense of an education system, the kids are learning to read and write and do math. And obviously in Decatur, that's not an issue. So
no, that's not an issue. You heard that loud and clear at our State of the Schools, where we did say that we are number one in the state for reading in grades 3, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and number one in math in 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So student outcomes come first. But when you look at Senate Bill 120 that then crossed over into House Bill 127, it does question what would be that local control. And so I want to just firmly say that as our lobbyists, that you are lobbying on behalf of the city of Decatur's, the city school of Decatur's best interest on that.
Yes.
Definitely.
Definitely. And then one other piece around local control, and this has definitely been a point of pride for us in the city schools of Decatur, is that we amplify our student voice. And we amplify the student voice in many ways, but one of which we are the first school system in Georgia to have a student sitting on our board that is elected by their peers, sworn in, attends all of the Georgia School Board Association training and all of our board meetings and retreats, except for executive session, and the student can't vote. But this has been an innovation here in the city schools of Decatur with the All in Decatur strategic plan that we are lifting up now to potentially be a legislative priority. So talk to me. What are you thinking about the possibilities for this?
I definitely think this would be a great benefit to school systems across the state. As far as the legislation statewide, maybe somewhat of a challenge, but I think definitely conversations can get started, especially we have the support. If we have the support of the Georgia School Board Association, that would be helpful. And
That you do.
wonderful. And then I think for something more pressing that may not take as much time to work, through the process would be an urging resolution. And that could go for very fast. We can, drop a urging resolution and, encouraging school boards from across Georgia to have a student representative.
And I will say that since bringing this online and through our regulation, we have presented at the Georgia School Board Association, as well as COSBA, which is the National School Board Association that we work through here in Georgia. We presented at both, and our frameworks are on our website, and we receive a lot of questions and a lot of kudos for placing it on the website, because they go ahead and just duplicate, replicate, or as a teacher term, scamper it, meaning they substitute, they combine, they do all sorts of things to make it work for them. But I love that. I love that idea. So that is really rounding out what would be that local control for us. And so we've talked about our legislative priorities, and so I thank you for that. But you are fully tapped in, ear to the floor of what is happening now. So talk to me about some of the things that we know from committee work that has happened this past summer and the off season that will be a priority here in 2026.
Sure. Well, I think one of the first ones that comes to mind is absenteeism, is
Yes.
student attendance. There were initiatives from both chambers, including some folks, as we've talked about, that are considering statewide office. And it's identification of this issue we've had since COVID, that kids are not showing up as on a daily basis in a lot of our schools. And obviously everything else sort of falls by the wayside if you can't get the child to school. And so these committees are studying the causes of that. What is it, where are the trends strongest? What are school districts doing to combat it? Obviously, if, in a district like Decatur's, where walkability is makes life a lot easier, that, that's going to probably have some different outcomes than a rural district where a kid's got to get on a bus and go 15 miles. And so, but beyond that, what can we do, with wraparound services? Groups like, the Boys and Girls Club and United Way have spoken into it. So it's unclear at this point exactly what the legislation will look like, but I think we do expect that they are going to, hopefully with funding, consider some measures to try to ensure that at the very least we're tracking if not daily attendance, more than just during those two FTE counts in October and March. So there's really a better sense for where once we identify a kid who's at risk of dropping out or is not coming to school, what are the things that we can do to mitigate that?
Yes, I will say in the City Schools of Decatur this past summer, we had a CELI fellow. And so that's a fellow from the Southern Education Foundation. And our CELI fellow was a student, actually a college student at Spelman. And she came to us and was with us for the summer. And one of the things she did was looked at our chronic absenteeism data, conducted focus groups and interviews with families to really identify the root causes for them. So we are looking into it. Yes, our numbers aren't the same indicator as in other parts of the state, but we do have chronically absent students. And when you do, there are supports that we can put into place and intervention. So excited to hear about that. Another piece of legislation that we're always watching is literacy and numeracy, the bread and butter, I like to call it, of education. And so what are some of the things that you think we might see or hear?
So I would say on the literacy front, now that this is the first year where we're actually implementing the literacy screener as a mandate. And so I would expect that as that data starts to come in and looking at the approved resources that are being used, we're going to see legislators come back to the table. My sense there may be some reticence for them to again go try to make a change to the statute, but certainly those reports back to the Literacy Council will guide next steps in terms of okay, what do we do now? And you mentioned numeracy, which is really interesting. That came up in the superintendent's recommendations for budget funding that he sent over to the governor's office, and I think that's a national trend we're seeing that. Okay, we've got the reading part down, but again, you got to be literate when it comes to math. You got to be able to add and subtract and multiply and divide. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we see a funding initiative similar to the literacy efforts, and again modeled after some of our neighboring states that have done the same thing.
Vouchers, promise scholarship. I will say City Schools of Decatur does not have any schools that are on any of the lists. And I hate that term. But from a legislative perspective, what should we be looking out for or thinking about when it comes to expansion at a state level, knowing one big beautiful bill also includes that from a federal level, Talk to us about it.
Well, I think with the upcoming elections, you probably won't see much movement in scholarships this year.
Okay.
I would say, from previous sessions from last year, we left a bad taste in a lot of legislators' mouths, and I just don't think there's an appetite to do much with scholarships for this year.
Okay.
Yeah, you might see a proposal, but I think Danica is absolutely right that the focus is now shifted to the regulatory side, to the enrollment of students, the eligibility of programs, and just how they're defining what it means to be in a failing school.
Yeah.
Because I think some legislators would say that what they thought that definition is different than how it's been implemented. And so at this point, I think it would be, well, we'll have to see, but I kind of think that we're sort of in a little bit of a holding pattern with that.
Okay. And then finally, when it comes to poverty rates, we've talked a little bit about how some of our community indicator is impacted on, financially just because of life. Where do you think we will be moving towards any changes in formulas, weights, lunch programs, anything like that?
I'm hopeful.
Okay.
That we will do more in that area because kids need to be able to come to school with the, full belly and ready to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I think addressing issues with folks who are unable to have access to not just food, but good quality food is something that we should address. However, with the recent development going on in our government, don't know if that is always a priority for most. But I do know that, especially in the city of Decatur and DeKalb County, we have legislators who are pushing forward with
Yes, we do.
legislation in that area. And I do think with, like I said early and often conversations with some elected officials, I think we can probably find someone to help sponsor that, in the majority party. Yeah.
Yeah, and one small sliver of hope is that they did provide a little bit of extra funding, about $12 million last year for economically disadvantaged students. I mean, again, the QB budget's $14 billion, so it's not a lot of money, but it's the first time they've done that, and so again, signals there are folks at the leadership level that are advocating that we need to start, thinking beyond Title I when it comes to how do we provide funds for those kids.
Yes. Well, I will say that our legislative delegation will hear these different priorities very soon. We're excited about them, and we do take them to the Board of Education for adoption in November so that you will be armed and ready. And so I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you for sharing all of your great insights around what's coming up next, sharing your insights around our current legislative priorities for 2026 and what we should be looking out for.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, awesome. So thank you so much for tuning in today for Words with Dr. Whitaker. And I look forward to continued conversation around what's happening not only under the Gold Dome, but more importantly, what is happening in education in CSD. Thank you so much and have a great day.